no matter how much your community kind of coalesces around your schools, you're still going to have difficult situations, right? You're still going to hit bumps in the road where you go, oh my gosh, is any of the work we've been doing anything, right? And you're going to go home at night and just be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. But persistence, and really coordinating with everybody,
Sure.
right? Like, you got to have all the community members involved. You got to have all of your departments involved, right? Student services here in Manteca Unified lives inside of our educational services department, but we work with our special education department. We work with our community relations and engagement to make sure that like we are reaching out as far as possible to as many community members as possible to bring them in different ways, to give their input and to give their ideas, because if they feel like they're being heard and seeing those things implemented in their schools, it's going to start to build that trust.
Hello. Joining me today on the Leaders Saving Lives podcast is Hans Schmitz, the director of MTSS at Manteca Unified School District in California. Thanks for joining me today, Hans.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. This is great.
So on our podcast today, we're going to be discussing the state of student safety and mental health in schools with a focus on kids that are most at risk and how you're addressing some of those unique challenges at Manteca Unified. So let's start with, can you tell me a little bit about your background and what led you to your current role as director of MTSS at Manteca Unified?
Yeah, definitely. So specifically within MTSS, I kind of handle the MTSS side for student services, what is traditionally your child welfare and attendance, plus a few other things. This is my 21st year in education, and I actually had never planned on being in education, to be quite honest. My degree's in political science, my minor's in international security and conflict resolution. I wanted to go to law school, and I, kind of took that path in college, and I thought I might want to do policy work for education and healthcare. And so I started teaching through Teach for America. They came and presented to the Pre-Law Society, and I got into the classroom, and I was, teaching for a couple of years, and at the same time taking the LSATs, getting into law school. And then in '08, the economy crashed, and I had already taken on a lot of debt for my bachelor's degree. I didn't want to take on more, so I was like, I'll stay in education. But I wasn't sure that I wanted to be in the classroom, so I left for a little bit. I worked in ed tech for a while because I grew up in the Silicon Valley, and I worked for tech support for PeopleSoft for a couple of years, and I had teaching experience. So I went to like a educational software company, ran their customer success department for a few years. Once my wife got her teaching credential and we could afford for me to kind of leave the tech industry, I went into an educational nonprofit running all the math and literacy interventions and after school programming for schools in the east side of San Jose. And then when my daughters were born, I decided to go back into the classroom. I was older. I was more patient. I was like, okay, I can teach. At first, I didn't think I could, but I went in. I taught middle school in East Palo Alto here in California. And then my wife and I moved out to the Valley. I moved into the high school space, started teaching English, broadcast journalism, yearbook, all of that. And after a number of years of teaching, I got bamboozled into administration somehow. And so my friends kind of talked me into becoming the vice principal. I was an administrator at the high school level for a few years, and then I moved into the student services world here. And at first, we were just kind of your traditional student services department. And as the years went on, we started to integrate more of the prevention work into what we do as well. And so my background of being interested in law with education and technology kind of all came together perfectly to kind of take over as the director of MTSS for student services here at Manteca Unified.
That's great. So you've kind of been on both sides, right? So you kind of started as an educator, moved over into the ed tech space. And so our backgrounds are similar. I started as a teacher and a behavior specialist. And then as all my teaching friends moved to the dark side on the ed tech sales side, and have been doing this for 28 years. But so again, I think your background is great given the role that you're in, because you kind of, where you started in high school and all of the things that you did. It's great experience for, that multi-tiered systems of support. That's excellent. So I think the first topic that I want to cover is really around crisis intervention and trauma-informed approaches in student services. And so the first question I'll ask is, can you describe the process Manteca Unified uses when a student is identified as being in, whether it's distress or crisis or posing a threat to themselves or others? Kind of what's the process?
Yeah, definitely. I think if we have some sort of indication that a student is in distress or possibly thinking about hurting themselves or others, we have a number of processes in place, right, that kind of work into our larger integrated continuum of supports that we've developed for students. And it starts by the person who kind of identifies the crisis, right, and making sure that they know the process of who to inform and who to bring in to make sure that we get the student the proper supports and interventions that they need for that particular crisis. And so it typically starts with one of two places here in Manteca Unified. And we partner with an organization called Valley Community Counseling. And Valley Community Counseling is a very large organization here in the Central Valley. And we have school-based counselors at every single school site here in Manteca, anywhere from 2 to 3 counselors per site. And we also have administrators who are highly trained in dealing with crisis response as well. And so what happens is if somebody identifies a student, they will immediately contact both our Valley Community Counseling school-based counselors on campus and the administrators, say, hey, I have a student here that needs some extra assistance. They're experiencing some sort of life crisis or event or thing that they're having a hard time regulating their emotions and they need some supports. And so they will refer them out to that person. And the student will go and sit down with them and they will really kind of assess what level of crisis is this student in. And if they are, actively thinking about harming themselves or others, or just in a state of crisis that they can't manage themselves, then based on what level they're in, we have to decide what supports to get them. And so that might be just continuing to talk to the school-based counselor, right? Maybe they're thinking about it, but they don't particularly have a plan. They don't have the means. They don't have the students often have these thoughts. And I don't think students realize how often their peers have thoughts like these, right? And so we help them kind of regulate and manage. We get permission slips out to parents so that they can continue to see the school-based counselors. And if that risk level is a little higher, then we typically bring in a second person to the room. We bring in the administrator with the school-based counselor, or we'll grab one of our school psychologists, or we will call our health services department and make sure the school nurse gets out to the school immediately to sit with that community counselor and the student and really assess how high of a risk is their crisis. And depending on what level, then again, we might involve, we would definitely, if it's to the point where we're bringing in two administrators, we're definitely going to involve the parents. We're going to bring them in and kind of inform them what's going on with their student and decide what level of help they either are suggested to get or perhaps required to get, depending on where that student's at. And then based on that, we help them find the supports they need. So if they, don't have insurance, we'll tell them which hospitals we can go to, which facilities we can go to. If they do, we'll help coordinate with them. We'll transport if we need to. We'll have a school administrator or a school nurse or a school resource officer follow that family to make sure they get there safely. And that's really where it starts with crisis of that level.
Excellent. Thank you. And so hearing all of that, I guess my next question is there's got to be a level of coordination, right? And so a lot of districts struggle, right? Because it sounds like, is it Valley, the counseling
Yeah,
service
Valley Community
is
Counseling.
really, Valley Community is really an extension of the work that you're doing at Manteca, but the coordination between student services and maybe there's those school-based counselors and maybe potentially emergency personnel or other mental health professionals. Is that a plan that you guys built? Did you kind of know the steps of the process depending on the level of crisis the student is in?
Yeah, it really is. And it's interesting, that level of coordination you're talking about was fairly disjointed at one point in time, right?
Okay.
There wasn't like a centralized place. All of the different pieces that go into this integrated continuum I referenced lived in different departments and different areas in the district. And so it was really interesting. One of the things that we've done over the years, like many districts, right, as laws have changed in California, as Ed Code has developed, as ESSA was updated, we brought in things piece by piece, right? We said, okay, we're going to bring in PBIS now. We had a crisis. We brought in Valley Community Counseling. We have RAP services that we offer to families. We brought those in. But what was happening is we were bringing them in piece by piece, like as laws changed or as they were needed. And oftentimes it felt like, oh, here's another thing we have to do, or here's another option, but I don't know how it fits into the larger system. And so what we did is we said, all right, we got to step back and figure out how all of these things work and how all of these things connect with each other. So we used this thing called the Interconnected Systems Framework. And the Interconnected Systems Framework really helped us understand what's the process we go through to align all of these resources and make sure that we can have that level of coordination that you're talking about, because it wasn't quite there yet. And so we took a solid year and a half where we pulled together like a very high level committee to look at all of our resources, to look at all of our partners, who are our like vendors and third parties, what are our internal systems. And we decided that we were going to look for redundancy. We were going to look for inefficiencies in communication, inefficiencies in programming, in resources, all of it, right? And start to eliminate redundancies. and create that system that you're talking about that really streamlines it to say when there is a crisis, like who is at the kind of center of coordinating all of this, right? And so what we did is within the MTSS for Student Services department, we started to pull in all those resources. So in our department resides not only your traditional CWA work, but we also oversee all of the PBIS work that goes on in our district. All of the social emotional learning that goes in our district is here. We have teachers on special assignment dedicated solely to social emotional learning. All of our mental health services came under us. Our student, not just student safety, but campus safety in general, our SROs, all of our emergency preparedness, all of that lives in student services. So when there is a crisis, either myself or one of my coordinators kind of takes the helm of coordinating that particular response. If we have like a district wide emergency or a very high level one, right? And then the school based systems kind of mimic that. When there is a crisis for a student, the vice principal or the principal, depending on who's in a meeting, who's not, what's going on campus, kind of takes the helm, and they're like their own little mini crisis response team where they're the ones that call the nurse, they call VCC, they call up to the district to let them know what's going on and let them know if there's any extra resources or supports they need. And then they really become the person that's calling the shots, sending the emails, the text message groups, all of that to make sure that everybody's in concert and we don't have 5 text threads going and 2 emails and, all of this to try and get that student help. There's one person in charge, and that gets defined at the beginning of the crisis, and they carry it all the way through.
That's great. I know that's a challenge for a lot of districts, especially taking the outside resources and marrying them to the internal resources and just having that plan approach. And I like that there's always a lead, whether it's you or one of your coordinators are taking the lead on that crisis, which allows you to kind of see it through and make sure that student gets the support they need. So
Yep.
again, I appreciate you sharing that because I know we work with a lot of districts and that is a big struggle is there's lots of folks that want to get involved and sometimes need to be involved. And it's those coordinated efforts that really can help streamline and make sure that student gets the help they need. I guess my next question is just about staff. Is there anything that you're doing at Manteca to, I guess, help the staff get training and de-escalation or and how often is that training refreshed? Is it yearly? Is it biannual? Things like that. So and I'm thinking more of the staff in the classroom, right? Obviously the supports that are under you. Is there anything you're doing so one they can identify and kind of know what to do in the moment to at
Yep.
least help get that student into kind of that next step of intervention?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think most of your listeners that are in education and listening to this, right, will relate when I say it's extremely hard to find time to train everybody. Right? Like whether it be just the sheer amount of time in a day, contractual obligations, like whatever the case may be, it can be hard. So we have like our basic everybody gets this training thing. And we do that through like a web-based training system where everybody at the beginning of the year is required to do a certain number of trainings. I know all districts in California are familiar with this, right? Everybody has to do it. And we do have de-escalation as part of that training path that everybody must complete at the beginning of every year. And it's like a 30-minute web-based one that gives you the basic overviews and things like that. And then what we do at a district level is we really try to make sure that we're training our administrators and other support staff that work with students in de-escalation and in like restorative circles and practices to kind of help reduce conflict as well. And what happens with that is we actually have there's like 2 things that we do there. One is we actually have a general education behavior support team that consists of a number of BCBAs and
Okay.
some support staff that support those BCBAs as well. And that lives within MTSS for Student Services. And we often have them come in and train our administrators, our school site assistants, which is like your traditional yard duty role. Our bus drivers have been trained in this area often, where we come in typically once a year. For some positions, it'll be like once every 2 years, we'll come in with like a new batch of staff and train them. But the BCBAs will come in and run that de-escalation training and really
Okay.
kind of give scenarios and look at past practices and things like that as well. And additionally, if they're not free or they're busy, we partner really closely with our special education department as well. I'm
Okay.
probably over in our senior director of special education's office on the daily basis, or she's in mine, and we're communicating about needs and students and things like that. And so we'll pull some of her team over to talk about de-escalation as well. And one of the efforts
Got it.
we're making next year is to make sure that every single site administrator is CPI trained, and specifically in that de-escalation portion of the CPI training, right?
Yeah.
To give them that extra set of skills that they need. And then when they go back to their sites, they can use some of their staff meeting time to kind of spiral that back in. Or if they're seeing that it's a really need at their site, if they're seeing in my department, we compose kind of monthly behavior reports, right? We look at suspension and other smaller offense numbers for discipline. And we will call sites and say, hey, we're noticing a spike. What do you need, right? Do you need some de-escalation training? Do you need somebody to come out to your staff meeting? What supports might you need? Because we're seeing a spike, right? And it's not necessarily because of anything that you're doing probably, but right, your student population might need something extra and we can provide that support for you. And the principals are really good about knowing what their sites need, right? So they'll say, hey, here's the explanation of what's going on. We don't really need any support. We have it under control. Or, yeah, can you please send out one of the BCBAs, or can your coordinator come out? Can we do a refresher in our PBIS systems and how to reteach expectations? Or can we give people some de-escalation strategies to be able to work with these particular students that seem to be struggling at this time?
Got it. And I know California is unique and they have a funding stream for mental health, the CYBHI. Are you guys leveraging any of that funding in Manteca?
We currently are not leveraging any of that funding ourselves, but we are partnering with organizations that do. So we have an
Okay.
organization that we work with that has provided wellness coaches to a few of our campuses as well. And they're
Okay.
using that funding stream to support that role and give it to us at no cost right now. So
Okay.
we're partnering with them and they're providing the wellness coaches on our campus at no cost to the district right now at some of our sites that have the highest need. Like anytime we deploy resources in our district, we do it on a needs based assessment because we are not that unique, but somewhat unique in that we are 26,000 students across 29 schools in 4 cities and townships. So we cover
Okay.
Manteca, Lathrop, French Camp, and South Stockton, which all have unique populations, unique needs, different demographics. And so really what we do is we look at each particular campus and say, what is the need at that campus based on student need, based on staff need, and each site creates a strategic plan and a needs-based budget that goes along with that strategic plan to say, because we see this particular thing happening in either our MAP scores or our behavior data or our anecdotal data even, these are the services that we require at our site. And then we deploy those services based on that need.
Got it. And in some of the other California districts that I've spoken to, one of the things that really seems to be used a lot is a lot of schools are having wellness centers in the
Yeah.
schools. Are you guys doing anything like that in Manteca? Some of it starts in elementary and middle. They're kind of phasing them in, but this idea of an area where kids can go, it's monitored, whether it's express their feelings, just kind of take a break. Are you guys doing any of that?
We have like various versions of that, right? Like we don't have
Okay.
a full on wellness center at each campus necessarily, or even at
Okay.
many of our campuses. However, um, each site kind of has their own variation of it, right? Like a lot of schools like to call it the Zen Den, where they
Yeah.
do have a space that students can go and de-escalate and calm down, spend some time kind of just like recentering themselves before they try to go back into that educational environment and be productive there. We are looking into those right now as far as how do we make it a little more systematic? How do we staff it properly? How do we
Yeah.
make sure that we're in compliance with those staffing needs, right? And what specific activities can the types of staff that we could put in there do. But we have a lot of the resources that you would traditionally find in a wellness center throughout the district. And again, as we see a student with a need, if that particular service isn't on that campus, that's fine. We can take it from this campus and say, we're temporarily going to have that service that's happening here come and help us out at this other campus as well. And so we can, one of the nice things about how we've centralized all of the interventions underneath MTSS for student services is we can kind of look at the chessboard up here and move the pieces as we need. And the administrators are really, really good at the site about communicating with us and communicating with each other and helping to like understand those needs and kind of move those pieces around as they're needed. But I think in the future, moving forward, it's definitely something that we are exploring. Like, how do we again make it more systematic and make it feasible so that like as these special funding streams run out, like those things don't disappear. Because I don't want to add
Right.
something to the district that's a really good service and then have a limited funding stream disappear and then have to take that service away. So we really think about what is the sustainability of a program when we introduce it so that we're not having all these things come and go all the time based on funding in a whim.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I love Zenden.
Yeah.
That's a good and look, space is always a challenge too,
Yeah.
right? Especially in
Yes.
a district of your size. And that's what a lot
Yeah.
of the other California districts I've spoken to have said, look, I wish we had space in every
Yeah.
school for some, but reality is we don't.
Yeah,
And
and a lot of
so
our campuses
space
are
is a
very
challenge.
impacted. Yeah, we have
Yeah.
a lot of San Francisco Bay Area families that have moved out here in the recent years because we are, I mean, it's an excessively long commute, but it's doable. And so
Yeah.
we've had, a lot of Bay Area and other California districts have seen declining enrollment in the last couple of years. Our enrollment has steadily increased over the last number of years.
So kind of last question on this topic, but are you able to share like a memorable situation where early intervention through MTSS prevented a crisis from escalating?
I'm trying to think of a memorable one, and I don't know that I necessarily have like one particular event that sticks out at me. I think one thing that works really well in our district is when we do have a particular crisis or event that requires a quick response. I think our team is like really, really good at providing that quick response. We have incredibly good relationships with all of our partners. We have incredibly good relationships with our law enforcement agencies in town and all the cities that we work in. Um, and I think the speed and quickness in which things happen is impressive for our particular districts. I've worked with a lot of districts over the years in that ed tech space that I talked about and otherwise. And I think, when I think about this, I, in my own cell phone, right, have the head of Valley Community Counseling's cell phone number. I have the chief of police's cell phone number. I have Victor Community Services, who does all of our wraparound work. I have their numbers because when something happens and I get a call on a Sunday morning saying, hey, we just found out that something tragic happened to this student's family, I can be on the phone with all of those people that day, and they pick up the phone on Sunday as well. And they start that service and they start the coordination. They will contact their people so that they see the emails either that night or first thing Monday morning, and we will deploy all the services we need as quick as possible. And so I think, while I can't think of a particular instance in which I'm like, oh, this is like the one thing that was really memorable. One thing that I can say is I also can't think of an instance where we ever said, man, our response was really bad to that. It was there's none of that either. It's
Yeah,
consistently quick and good, and sites will often tell us like, thank you for the support, right? Thank you for being able to deploy all of that so quickly to our site so that we can get what we need.
that's great. That's great. All right, I'm going to shift a little bit here to the next topic, and it's really around building community trust and shared responsibility for student and school safety.
Yeah.
And so, kind of my first question here is how is Manteca's approach to transparent communication about safety protocols and discipline practices change the way parents view school safety?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there's a few things that we have in place that help with that transparency piece that you're talking about. And so, here in California, every school site has to have a comprehensive site safety plan, right? And it has to be updated every single year. And that site safety plan outlines a lot of things. It outlines general campus safety. It outlines emergency responses. It outlines disaster relief. Like it's a very thick document for every school. And one of the things that's great about how those are developed is the administration team works with a number of groups on campus to develop those plans, right? They, as an administrative team, work on building out those processes and those systems. They then take it to their staff meetings and kind of share the overview of that document with them. Then they take it to their school site council, which involves parents and students and teachers. And they really go over that plan together every year and say, hey, this is how we handle this. This is what we're doing. Um, and the team is able to ask questions and develop a really deep understanding of those plans as needed, right? So that they can then go out to their other organizations and groups and kind of share with them how their particular school site or the district is handling something of that nature. And then the other thing that we do really well is at each of our community meetings in which we share our LCAP results and get feedback on our future LCAPs is we really typically set up like stations in which you can go talk about safety, you can go talk about discipline, you can go talk about student achievement, and community members have the opportunity to really ask those questions of the district and understand kind of deeply if they go down that hole with us, they go down that path with us, what our plans are and how we respond. And so there's that aspect. And then I think kind of the third prong to this is we have a really strong community relations department in which they're constantly sending out newsletters and information and sharing information on our social media. And when parents have questions, right, they immediately start finding who can answer this question best. Where do we need to route this question to in order to make sure that this particular community member or organization can get the most detailed, accurate response possible, um, in order to feel comfortable that they know our processes along the way.
Got it. That's great. And you talked a little bit about this, and it just made me think of a question that I know a lot of districts struggle with. You mentioned, having the chief of police's number on your phone, the Valley community ahead of that on your phone, and one of the things districts struggle with is some of those alerts and things that happen after the school day, on holidays, on weekends. And you mentioned, you kind of cover 4 different areas. So I'm
Yeah.
assuming that's 4 different police jurisdictions, or maybe more, right? If you have county and city and all of the other things. And
Yeah.
so how are you addressing those alerts after hours? And I guess so that's question 1. Question 2 is, today sending law enforcement to a home in some cases has a different meaning. And just the sensitivity that you guys are facing when you kind of have to do that. So it's just kind of a 2-part question. How do you address those after hours collectively as your organization? Because you have SROs, you have counseling and everything under kind of one umbrella. And then if you have to make that difficult call, how are you addressing that?
Yeah. I think when I think of our, you're right. We do have a number of law enforcement agencies that we communicate with. And so the way that we really address those alerts comes back to those emergency systems that I was talking about, right? Of making sure that there's one point of contact, there's one person that really kind of takes the helm of things. And that might depend on who we're trying to communicate and what alerts we're getting. And so um, one of my coordinators is in charge of safety, right?
Okay.
And he holds a lot of the relationships with different officers, with all the different organizations and things like that. And so, while I personally can handle a lot of the calls that come in, when I can't, I rely on him. I'll call him up. His name is Dennis, and I'll say, Dennis, I need you to get a hold of, an officer at Lathrop PD. I need more information on this event. And I think the way that those alerts come in varies depending on the event itself, right? When things happen on the weekends, when things happen after hours, we rely heavily on the community to inform us. In all honesty,
Yeah.
our SROs are off at 3:30 p.m. And they're off for the day. But what we've done over time is built really good relationships with officers that aren't even SROs, right? I know the names of many of the officers that aren't necessarily SROs, but they're on swing shift or they're on night shift. And I make sure that when they come out and they're picking up overtime at our football games and our basketball games, I'm introducing myself. I'm getting to know their name. I'm getting their cards. I'm giving them mine. Um, and we have a really good relationship there, that there's not just one place we can go to try and figure out information about that event or that alert. And one of the other ways that I really handle that specifically as like the director of MTSS for student services is I try to ingrain myself as much in our communities as I can, right? Like I live here, my kids go to school in our district. I follow all the community groups on social media. We had a major event just a couple weeks ago, and our head of health services, I get a text message from her with a screenshot of social media, and there was an incident where a large truck collided with a youth, and we were pretty sure it was one of our students, but we didn't know. And so I immediately called the non-emergency number of the police department, said, hey, I'm Hans Schmitz, I'm director of student services. It's my understanding that this incident that's happening right now may involve a school age student, and we want to make sure we get that family support come the next school day. What information can you give me? And so it typically starts with, well, we can't give you much information. Right now it's
Yeah.
currently an active situation, but as the night goes on, there's different officers we can call. Again, I can reach out to a number of people in the chain of command at the police department. Dennis, our coordinator of safety, can reach out to fire and EMS because he's got connections there. And we really kind of go to all the different places we can get information and centralize it. And then we can communicate out with the rest of the community and get whatever services we need out there to them. So I feel like that feels the first half of your question. I don't remember the second
Yeah.
half of the question was. So
Just again, sending local law enforcement to a home, whether it's for a wellness check or things like that. There's a lot of districts that are really struggling with, again, given the things that are going on, making that call to send an officer to a home? And just, are
Yeah.
you dealing with some of that in kind of your
Yeah, we
area?
we we do deal with that a bit. So I think you have to think about, why are you sending an officer to a home, right? Like, what are
Yeah.
the reasons that you would send an officer there? And so we actually have a very good relationship with our SROs, our school resource officers, and I think the community does as well. However, that being said, we have to really be strategic about when do we send that officer to a home, because you're right, like that can send a number of messages, and it can be very nerve wracking for a family to have an officer show up at their door. And so, unless it's an absolute school safety emergency. Like, we have a threat on a campus. We had a student make a social media post, or students are hearing rumors that another student might be doing something extremely unsafe. We tend to send administrators out to the house first. We
Yep.
really stress home visits with our administrators when there are attendance issues, let's say, right? And we haven't seen a student for a week and we want to do a welfare check. We'll typically send two administrators, or an administrator and an outreach liaison, out to that house first, right? To knock on the door and say, hey, we're really worried because we haven't seen you for a while and you guys haven't called in. Like, we just want to make sure that you're safe, that there's nothing we can't do to help, things like that. And if we continue to not be able to get a hold of that family, then we might call our school resource officer and say, hey, we need a more formal welfare check, because we've gone and done, we've called, we've emailed, we've done our own home visit. We just can't seem to get a hold of this family. And so we really want to make sure that that particular student is safe, that that family is safe. And then we'll send the SRO out to do that. And then the other reason that we would send an SRO out is, again, for that extreme safety. Again, get a call on a Saturday. We hear this is going to happen on Monday. We'll call the police department and we'll say, hey, we're hearing this. We need an officer to go check it out for us. And they will take on that investigation, and they will move that way, and go and handle that for us. And then we decide how is the school district going to be involved once they kind of have their findings.
Got it. And one of the things I really love is just, you keep referencing community, and it really sounds like there's a lot of community involvement in a rather large district, right?
Mhm.
26,000 kids. And you don't often hear the tightness of the community and the community involvement and all of those things. So,
Yeah.
again, the beginning of this topic was building community trust, and it really
Yeah.
sounds like you guys have that, right? And it's not perfect everywhere, but for a district of your size, it's it's nice to hear that you guys are doing a lot to really work with the community on all aspects, right? Whether it's learning, whether it's safety, whether it's mental health, and all
Yeah.
of those things, I think are things that districts are continuing to try to do, right? How do we get the community involved, to whether it's to support the kids, or just be involved?
Yeah, those community partnerships are just really important, I think, is really what it comes down to. 'Cause like I said, we partner with the counseling services, we partner with the RAP services. We really try and partner with the city as well. And, anytime they're doing something that might connect back to school, like recently, we've had a whole series of town halls on, like, human trafficking, so that we can inform
Yep.
families, because, like, we are right on the I-5 corridor.
Yep.
If you look at a heat map that are put out by national studies, like, it is bright red all through our cities. And so, we decided, with the Super Bowl coming and the World Cup coming and all of these things happening, we should have this kind of town hall. And so the police department reached out and said, hey, let's do this. And we partnered with them and we held some fairly successful town halls, right? So if we
Yep.
see in a couple of years ago too, we've got, every once in a while when we get heavy rains, there are some very serious flood concerns if the levees give or break. And so, a number of years ago, again, we had a concern that one of the levees might give, and it was going to cause some major disasters in our kind of southern part of town. And we worked really closely with our emergency response services, to identify which of our gymnasiums are going to become emergency shelters. How are we going to still run school and do this? And we did that by partnering with community organizations and running that response with those community organizations. And so any chance we get to partner and discuss and have dialogue, we jump on it.
That's great. Is there any advice that you would give to other districts about building trust with their communities around school safety?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I see myself as, like, the doler of advice, on these things sometimes, but I think, I can't stress the importance of it. If you have the support of your community, it makes your job 8 million times easier, right? And so it can be uncomfortable at first, right? When you decide that you're going to be very transparent about the things that you do, it can cause a level of anxiety, because what if I say the wrong things, or what if
Yeah.
I tell too much or too little, or they won't trust me. And I think, putting faith in our community that they can handle the tough conversations, right? and they
Yep.
can handle those difficult scenarios, and putting faith in that uh, we all want to work together, right? To make sure that our students are safe, they feel respected, they feel like school is a place that they want to go and they want to be at, and they'll be safe at it. Um, it's really worth that discomfort. It's worth those difficult conversations. And it can be a little painful at first because if you've never done it, or if you've had some missteps in the past, right, and you have to kind of repair some relationships, it's going to be difficult to do along the way. But the end result of getting through that initial difficulty is just well worth it, because it produces a feeling on campuses, just changes the whole dynamic of how that campus works, right? And how that district works. And like you said, it's certainly not perfect. My goodness, we have a lot of work still to go in these areas. And you're always, no matter how ingrained you are in the community, no matter how much your community kind of coalesces around your schools, you're still going to have difficult situations, right? You're still
Sure.
going to hit bumps in the road where you go, oh my gosh, is any of the work we've been doing anything, right? And
Yeah.
you're going to go home at night and just be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. But persistence, persistence,
Yeah.
persistence, and really coordinating with everybody, right? Like, you got to
Absolutely.
have all the community members involved. You got to have all of your departments involved, right? Student services here in Manteca Unified lives inside of our educational services department, but we work with our special education department. We work with our community relations and engagement to make sure that, like, we are reaching out as far as possible to as many community members as possible, to bring them in different ways, to give their input and to give their ideas, because if they feel like they're being heard and seeing those things implemented in their schools, it's going to start to build that trust even more.
Absolutely. All right. Last question. I love to ask this. So,
Okay.
if you were king for a day, unlimited resources, you know, money was no object. Are there
Yeah.
anything that you would? Is there anything or something that you would implement or add to the great work you're already doing in Manteca?
Wow. Implement or add to the work that we're doing here in Antigua if I was king for a day. That's it. I mean, I don't think we have that much time. I don't know if you've ever seen Sir Ken Robinson's RSA talk on
Yeah.
the education system, right? And
Yep.
that I think if I were king for a day, I would take a lot of his ideas and that and implement them in just how our schools run, and I would be developing, community schools that are based on what students are interested in and all that stuff. But if I'm being more realistic
Yeah.
about it, right? I think some of those wellness centers you were talking about, I think that's definitely a path I would go down. And this idea of community schools as well. I think more of our
Mhm.
campuses would look like those community schools. I think oftentimes over the years, whether it be intentional or not intentional, by different uh, Senate bills and House bills that have passed, and the way Ed code has changed, the expectation of what a school system does is much different than it was 30 or 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
We used to just be a place where people showed up, they learned their reading, writing, and arithmetic, and they went home. And that was that, right? And over the years, we've realized that there's a lot of barriers for students to learn in an equitable environment where everybody's kind of on the same footing. And
Yeah.
because of that, there are a lot more things that school systems need to do to make sure that students are ready to learn.
Yeah.
And if I had all the resources in the world, like, I would have full blown wellness centers at every campus. I would have a social worker at the campuses that need social workers. I would have laundry facilities on campus. I would have um, things that would remove every barrier possible for a student to feel as though they belong, to feel as though they fit in at school. I don't want anybody coming worrying about being hungry, which they don't in our district. Trust me. Like, I don't want any student coming to school feeling as though their clothes are dirty or outdated, or feeling in any way as an other, right? That doesn't belong there. And so if I could bring in all the things we need to make students all feel like this is their space and their community and the place that they should be for 7.5 hours every day,
Yeah.
then I would bring in all of those resources and develop those schools and just have facilities that look like little mini colleges everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's great. And you're right. It has changed, and we're seeing it's going to continue to change.
Yeah.
And so you guys are doing great things. Hans, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing the things that you're doing in Manteca to, support student and school safety as well as mental health.
Yeah.
And, districts across the country are grappling with a lot of these things right now, and just appreciate you, sharing some of the things that have been successful in Manteca. So thank you.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the opportunity. Like I said, I don't always see myself as the doler of advice, but I know that in some cases there are districts that are doing things way better than us. But in other cases, I'm sure somebody will listen to this podcast and go, "Oh, it's a great idea." And just being able to share those things with everybody is helpful, right? Like we as an educational community have to band together to make sure that we're doing what's best for everybody. And I think the sharing of ideas and dialogue like this is really important to that. So I appreciate the opportunity to come on today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And again, keep doing the great work that you're doing.
Cool. Right on. Thank you.
Thanks. All right.
Thank you for listening. If you found this conversation valuable, please consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps others discover the show and supports our mission. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time on Leaders Saving Lives.